When you're ever creating an image and you think you're done, you might not be done. If you think you're done, first off, when you're creating a new document, I mentioned that I'd show you this, and I didn't the other day, and it asks you for a resolution setting. These are the ranges that I suggest. If you go any lower than these numbers for these purposes, then you can find that your images look jaggy. They look pixelated. They look like you can tell they're made out of squares. Okay? If you go any higher than this, then you will find that sharpening is less effective and your file size is much bigger than you need. But within that range, you're fine. Then, if you have an image and you're going to send it out to be printed, if it's going to be printed on a printing press, when you create a new document, if that's how you create it, and you type in your size, you come in here at inches, and let's say it's 8 by 10. If you're going to print on a printing press, and I do mean printing press, I don't mean any other kind of printing, then they usually want your document to actually be bigger. That's what's known as bleed. And so bleed is where they're going to trim away some of the paper, and they need to make sure your picture doesn't stop right where they're supposed to trim. So if they're the littlest bit off on their trimming, they would miss and have a little white gap. So usually you want to come in here and choose canvas size and add some extra space. If you turn on this checkbox called relative, that means add the amount of space I type in right now to whatever size I already have. So if you ask the company that's going to print your image how much bleed they want, that means extra space they want. You could put it in here, or you could just guesstimate. You don't need a lot, but if you put like a 1/4 inch or something like that, at minimum, it's going to make it so if they end up cropping things away, they're going to be a little extra picture for them to cut. So it's just one thing to talk about if you're going to be printing. And then the final thing is only after you resize your image to its final size. And that means going to the image menu and choosing image size. And in here, thinking about how big will this image be printed. You're about to print it. How big will it be printed? Type in the numbers here of how big it will be printed. So if I'm only going to use this as an 8 by 10 or something near that size, or in this case a 10 by 6, scale it to its final size, and then as a one final step, sharpen it. Usually I use Smart Sharpen if it's for most images. And in here, you want to sharpen it if it's for on-screen use until this preview looks good. If it's for printing, you want it a little sharper than that. But what happens if it's for a printing press, what I would do is zoom out here to about 50% view and sharpen it when you're viewing it at that size. The amount controls how much contrast you're adding, how much sharpening you're adding, and the radius controls how wide of an area it applies that to. So this ends up adding little halos to your picture, little like brighter or darker lines around the edges of objects. And if you end up with this radius too high, you're going to end up being able to see them. If you've ever seen a white line around the edge of a mountain where it touches the sky, it's because this radius setting was too high. So you can look at your image. But view it at about 50% view if you're going to be printing on a printing press, and then adjust it until you like that. So those are just a few things to think about if you know you're going to prep them to send off to some other people. Is if it's on a printing press, ask about bleed. Because if you don't have bleed in your image, then it means they might cut off the paper just a little bit beyond where your photo was supposed to end, and that it's, you have a white gap. That's only for photos that extend all the way out to the edge of the sheet of paper. And Only sharpen your image after you scale it down to the size you're going to print it at. Because what happens is if you don't scale it down first to this final size or up that you're going to print it to, then the sharpening is less effective. The printer ends up scaling it down, and the little sharpening, which might be 1 pixel wide, is minimized so much that you might not even be able to tell you sharpened it. So scale down to the final size first. All right, so we've been here for 3 full days.
3 full days.
On the first day, we learned how to adjust our pictures. We used one thing a lot. We even used it so much we used it on the second and the third day too, Camera Raw. Because you can never underemphasize how much power is in that thing. Then on the second day, we talked about layers, because layers are a fundamental part of Photoshop, and that makes it so that what we do is not permanent. The original image is always at the bottom. We build everything on top of that. And it makes it so we have a lot of versatility. And then today, we couldn't stop getting into Camera Raw, but we also got into retouching and some creative effects. So hopefully this is a good level for you guys to get started with.